Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be on cultural Marxism. Now, a lot of people say that cultural Marxism is a conspiracy theory, and I'm going to just give a little bit of the history of it, and whether you believe it's truly something that there's an active force that is promoting it, or if it's just something that's happening organically, that doesn't matter. I'll give the history and you'll understand. So what happened was during the first part of the 20th century, there was a real shift that happened after Marx wrote the Socialist Manifesto. And there was a belief that within a few years, the whole world would be a socialist utopia. And there was a school of thought called the Frankfurt School that really believed that this would come to reality. And what happened was there was the First World War. Now they really thought that the First World War would just prove the case that, they really thought that the First World War would push people to say, hey, let's reject our nationhoods. Let's reject this capitalist evil system and let's move to a socialist utopia. So they thought that the war wouldn't even happen because nobody would embrace their nationhoods over their own personal collective needs or desires. But that turned out to be false. And they were disappointed because they saw that what happened was there was things that prevented people from embracing socialism. And the three things that they identified as preventing socialism from really being achieved was the nationhood, the nationalist tendencies of people, people's families, that they would have like a natural desire to put their family first over the state. And then the third thing is the individual. Now there's a fourth thing, which is actually religion. But I'm going to show you how the goals of the socialists, of these cultural Marxists, were to basically destroy the very things that prevented socialism from being brought into our world. So the very first thing is nationhood and the concept of nationality. So what happened was, what you have to do, if you want to destroy nationhood, what you have to do is devalue it. Make it so that it doesn't really mean anything. So a lot of the time we were told, there's no identity, which is, for example, American identity or Canadian identity. Canada, we don't have an identity. Anyone can be a Canadian, anyone can be an American. And that's what we're told repeatedly. And that's really the thing that breaks down the concept of nationalism. Because if there's no identity associated with that nationhood, then it's really hard to get behind it. It's hard to really back your team if there's nothing that really makes your team any different from any other team. So that's the first thing you do. You gotta really break down that concept of what it is to be a Canadian or an American or a European or whatever. Break that down so it has no meaning. So you'll see a lot of people that kind of practice this cultural Marxist ideology will really try to promote the concept that it doesn't mean anything to be somebody of a particular nation. So that's the first thing. And then what they do is go even further with that, and they actually demonize the nation as a whole. And you'll see a lot of this where they'll promote that, the American nation, they're white supremacist, or they're colonialist, they're all these things that make the nationhood, the nation as a structure, a negative thought. They make it so that people won't embrace it because they'll see it as a negative thing. And again, that's about weakening the sense of nationality and nationalism. To go even further with it, they will make it even demonized, where they'll say, well, somebody who is nationalist is like Nazi, where, you know, the Nazis were the National Socialists, okay? They're nationalists. And they try to promote the concept that anyone that is nationalist is somebody who is inherently evil and has these major flaws of being racist, sexist, whatever. They try to make it so that people feel that being a nationalist is a negative trait. So this is how the cultural Marxist theory works, that it breaking down and destroying the concepts of these three major things: nationalism and the family and the individual. Now, how does it break down the family? Well, it tries to destroy the family in the following way. One way is if you can get the two major components of a family to be broken, which is the woman and the man. And what you do is you say, well, women, you don't need men. You don't need men to have all these things. Well, that is one way of breaking down the family. You can just encourage women to reject the family unit, reject that whole concept of being part of a family. And what they do to achieve that, they say, well, women, you should focus on your careers. You should focus on other things that distract you from your true happiness. They say that this is your true happiness, that being part of a family is not going to make you happy. So they encourage women to sort of reject the family. And it works. You know, if you keep on telling women enough, and they, you know, propaganda is great. It works very well. You can convince women that they don't want a family. And what we've seen is this has happened in the West, where women generally are having less children. There's more single motherhood rates. And we're seeing women having children much later in life. So it has worked in some extent. Like, whether you believe that this is organic in terms of that it's just naturally happening within our society, or if it's some master plot, doesn't matter. It is happening in our society. So this is the first thing. To break down the family, you have to convince women that they don't want to be part of the family. Now, what also happens is you have to convince the other side, which is men, that they don't want a family as well. And men are a little easier to convince in some ways, because what you do is men, you say, oh, you know, women are going to reject you. You can make women toxic to men, and men won't want to be with women. And women, you know, they're kind of annoying nowadays, where they treat men as if they're scum. They treat men as if they're toxic masculine. They treat men in a very negative light. And what'll happen is, after a while, if you're being constantly put down by women, you won't really want to be with them. And if women are being told that they don't need a man, well, what'll happen is, even if the man gets the woman pregnant, the woman will say, well, I don't need you to be part of the child's life. I'll just go off on my own. And the man will be like, well, I guess so. Just, they don't care. And not that men really feel that way, but because of all this negativity, men will less likely want to stay with the woman. So you have the breakdown of both men and women, where they're just, instead of being a unit, a family unit, they're being pushed apart by the propaganda of our society. So then, what really happens is you have to take it further. If you ever watch the movie In the Killing Fields, there's a really amazing scene that really sort of crystallized in my mind what socialism means. And it was a scene of a socialist indoctrination camp, where they were teaching young children what family really means. And for the socialist, what family really means is the socialist state, that the government is your family, that that you as a child or as a person have to embrace the most important thing is not your parents or your siblings, it is your state, that the government is there to take care of you. So what they did was they drew a picture of a traditional family. They drew the father and the mother and the little children, and this was all drawn on a whiteboard. And what they did was they had all the family members holding hands. Now, they asked the children in the class, what is wrong with this picture? And the child, one of the good children that was well indoctrinated, stood up and walked over to the board and erased the lines between the hands so that no longer the little stick figures weren't holding hands anymore. And that's really the way the socialists see it. They want that breakdown of the family, because if you rely on each other, if you rely on your family, then you will not rely on the state, because you don't need the state. If we can rely on each other, why do we need the government to take care of us? So it's really important for a socialist state to have the government be in control, and for the people within that society to rely on the government. So the third part of breaking down the family is really breaking down that child connection, that children are no longer seen as controlled by the parents, but they're really controlled by the state. So you'll see movements where they'll create laws that really take the authority of parenting away from parents and put it into the control of the state. Some basic things that'll happen is schools will be encouraged that at a younger and younger age, so that children can be indoctrinated at a younger and younger age. Whether, as I said, you can believe this isn't a conspiracy or not, it is what's happening. So if you can have the state be the parent much earlier, then generally what will happen is you can teach the kids the things that you want to teach them, and to embrace the state as the parent rather than your actual parents. And you'll see a lot of people that are on the left really push this concept of the state being the parent, that the state should offer free daycare, offer free things that take the child away from the family. So going further with this, they will teach the children more about things like, one of the things that drove me nuts when the whole transgender movement was at sort of its peak, they were teaching children to say, hey, look, I identify as something other than a man or a woman or girl or boy, whatever it was. And they taught them to say, hey, look, if your parents don't let you identify as what you want, then tell us as a state, tell your teacher, and we'll do what we can to take you away from your parents so that you can get the freedom that you deserve to be the individual you want to be. So they would take children away from their parents and teach them, hey, you can decide for yourself. The state can help you. And that's where you create this third division between the children and their parents. To go even further with it, what you want to do is also really break down the concept of family. That now family isn't just a mother and father and children. That we have something called the non-traditional family. And this can be two fathers or two mothers. And studies have shown that if it's two mothers, generally it's a much more abusive family relationship. Two fathers, it just doesn't work as well as a family which is comprised of a mother and father. So what they try to do is they break down the concept of family. That family is no longer about two individuals coming together and producing their own children. It's now can be about anything. They try to promote single motherhood, as I said. They try to promote these non-traditional families. And this is all about basically breaking down the strength of what was once a very powerful unit in most people's lives, which is the family. That's one of the most strong bonds that we have is our family. And this is what's happening now. We see this all the time. And now there was even a thing, and what inspired this video actually, there was even a thing where the Google executives were caught catering to this concept of that family is not a good term anymore, that we should avoid using the word family because it might offend the people that are not in a family. So you see that they actually try to even demonize the word family itself. And that's the scariest thing, that they really try to break down the very fundamental unit of humanity, which is the family. And this is all part of, if you can control these things, you can achieve your utopian socialist state. That if you can just get rid of nationalism, get rid of the family. And the last thing that you have to get rid of and destroy completely is the individual. Socialist states basically work on a collective mentality, that you need the state to control all the members within its borders, within its system. And what you need to do is control people and make them part of a group. Well, how do you do that if everybody's an individual? Everyone's free. Well, that's not a good thing if you want to create a socialist state. You want everybody to be the same, because if they're all the same, they're easy to manipulate. They're easy to say, hey, you're all worth the same. We're gonna achieve the goals because we know exactly where you fit in. There's no guessing. Everybody's the same. And if everybody's the same, we all have the same expectations, which is very socialist. That there shouldn't be people that make more than somebody else. Everybody should have the same opportunities, same outcomes, same everything. That's the goal of socialism, that everybody's equal. Egalitarian state. Now, how do you do that if you have a whole bunch of individuals? Well, you have to break down that individual. And the way you do it is you first make people identify as a group, even if it's a small group. The first easiest group for people to identify with is their race. So you say, well, you're black, you're white, you're Indian, you're whatever. You identify them within the group. And then you say, well, if you criticize any other group, then you're racist. You're completely racist, because not only are you identifying with a group, but you're all groups should be equal. And we have to push that in our society, that all groups are equal, and you may be part of this group, but your group is no different than any of these other groups. And that's one of the sleights of hand that the socialists will kind of push, that we have to be part of a group, yet our group is no different than any other group. Because if they suggest any differences, then that's racist. But if you understand the meaning of that, well, if my group is no different than any other group, then what does the group really mean? Because if we're all basically equal, well, then what difference does it make if I'm in this group or that group? They're basically the same anyways. One's no better than the other. And that's the sleight of hand that socialists will play, where they'll try to give people a sense of identity politics, like an individual. We're not an individual. We're part of a group, and that group is no better than any other group. And that's the amazing thing about socialism, that they can do these kind of sleights of hand. So one of the most important things to achieve this is really promoting the idea of equality. Now, equality is super important. It's almost like the fundamental core structure that that socialism relies on to achieve its ends. Because if everybody is equal, then nobody's better than anyone else. Then in a socialist society, well, a socialist utopia, everybody's getting the same, everybody's equal. Well, equality is basically about promoting that concept. Because what ends up happening in a non-socialist society is you have disparity. You have people that are rich, you have people that are poor, and the people that got rich, well, they probably got rich because they worked hard and they were smarter or had more skills, or they might even had a better background where they just were born into wealth. Well, that, according to socialists, is a very bad thing. They want everybody to have equal outcome. Everybody's equally happy, everybody has equal status in society. And there is some, it sounds good when you say everybody's equal, but it ignores a very real biological thing, that we are not equal. There are people who are smarter than us. There are people who are dumber than us. And there are people who are lazy. There are people who are hardworking. We're all different. And to expect that we will achieve the same outcomes based on our natural abilities is really kind of crazy. But for a socialist, it's essential. So we have to assume that we're all equal. And if you even suggest that some people are better than others, then you're sexist, racist, whatever, and some ist. Like they'll control you by making you feel guilt for being better than somebody else. Okay? Or thinking that people can be better than other people. So that's fundamental to the socialist thing, where you have to break down that individual, make them feel like they need to be part of a group, make them feel that they can be no better than anyone else, and then you got to push the whole idea of group identity. You have to make each group distrust each other, which is kind of interesting, where they have all the groups kind of competing with each other. They're all equal, but they compete with each other. For example, black versus white, men versus women. What they do is they try to create these groups that are all competing with each other. Okay? And the reason they do that is if you have the groups where no group is better than the other, yet they see each other as being the reason for their own faults, then they're going to rely on a bigger group. And the bigger group is the government. The government has to be the one that is the arbiter of all the groups, and it's one that we're all part of. And this is the ultimate goal of socialism, that we all see ourselves as part of a bigger group, which is people part of a government society. That the government has full control over all the people within it. And that it's only one that can really decide who deserves what. Okay? We have to rely on the government, because we can no longer rely on ourselves, because we see ourselves as as flawed, as being part of meaninglessness. I don't know how to describe it, but one of the other things, so the group is really important for a socialist society, and where if you compare like a socialist society versus a capitalist society, a capitalist society is very individualistic. The merits of that person really determine their success in life, and it promotes the individual as being the most important. Whereas a socialist society really promotes the concept of group. And one of the things that they do to promote that concept of group is they promote the concept of inclusion and exclusion. Now, when something is inclusive, it means that it brings everybody in. Everybody's part of it, and that's so great. If you look at the Boy Scouts, well, the Boy Scouts were originally just a boys group, but that's exclusionary, right? Right? It doesn't allow for everybody to be part of it. So part of the push was to make the Boy Scouts more inclusive. Okay? So what they do is they say, well, how do we make it more inclusive? We bring in women. We bring in girls, okay, into the Boy Scouts. So what ends up happening is the concept of that group breaks down, but it's now an inclusive group, becomes bigger. So the goal is to make the groups bigger so that they just become one big blob. And everything is controlled by the state. And what happens is the Boy Scouts become the Scouts. And it's now a boys and girls group. And it has no more meaning, but it's just a group of children. Now, probably they'll take that even further and say, well, that's exclusionary too. Why not have adults in it? And they'll keep on pushing for more and more inclusion and breaking down that individual group concept and make it something that's bigger and more broad reaching. So what they'll do is they'll use these things where they'll make people feel guilty if they're not inclusive. Back to nationality, back to the family, what they try to push is the concept that if you exclude people, so Canada doesn't mean anything because it can be open to anybody to come in. We are completely inclusive. That's the concept they'll push, that the group, the individual is gone, the individual's nature is gone. What makes the country great, what makes the family great, what makes the individual great doesn't matter. It's all about that inclusionary group, that the group it should encompass everything. So I hope this makes sense. It's I know it's kind of a big concept, and I'm not sure if I'm articulating it as well as I should. But the concepts are real, that people need to understand that the way socialism works and the way that cultural Marxism works is it's all about achieving these goals of breaking down the nationhood, breaking down the family, and breaking down the individual. And again, with the individual, I really want to stress that one of the things that they'll do to break down the individual is they'll make people feel like the individual is super important. And what they'll do is they'll say, and this is where they'll do another sleight of hand, is where they'll say, everybody is special. There's a million different gender identities. There's so many things that make people all special. We're all our unique identity. And they'll break down the concept of the individual, because if we're all something special, then, and we all mean, and there's no meanings to what it is to be us, then, and we're all equal, then what ends up happening is the individual becomes meaningless. If we're all equally special, then in the end, no one is special. Okay? And that's how you break down the individual. So at first it makes it look like, oh, they're promoting this whole idea of everybody is special, which sounds great. But then in the end, we're all just nothing special. Nobody's any better than anyone else. And we're all just part of a big group, the collective, the socialist collective. And we all have to rely on the state to define what that collective is. And that's when you have a socialist state. When you achieve all these goals, you've broken down the state, a nationhood, I should say. When you break down the nationhood, when you break down the family, you break down that individual so that they're 100% reliant on the government. Then you have your socialist utopia, because there's nobody to resist you. So this is my thoughts on cultural Marxism. I hope that I gave you a bit of understanding of the way it promotes itself and impacts our society. And I hope you enjoyed this video, even though it was, again, a bit of a rant. Please check out my other videos. Please give me some feedback in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.